In this video, I will demonstrate how to use Excel to uh, draw a sample from a population. We'll start with some quick navigation tips in Excel, and then we'll look at how to select a subpopulation from the data, how to restrict your population, and then we will learn how to choose a simple random sample from the data, and then we'll actually choose two samples and pool them together. So let's look at our data set. This is a data set consisting of student records, anonymized. We have code numbers that tells us grade level, gender, ethnicity, the highest level of education the parents have received, the feeder middle school, whether the student is low socioeconomic status, and the student's GPA. I can use the arrow keys to navigate around Excel. You can see that this toolbar here tells me what is contained in the cell, because sometimes what's contained is a formula. And I want to know what those formulas are so we can examine the cell. Now, if I start in the upper left corner, if I hold down the Control key, I can use the arrow keys to jump to the end of the data table. So here I hit Control right and I went to the right of the data table. You can see that here. What it's actually doing is looking for the next blank cell. So I found this cell and it kept me just to the right of that. So if I hit Control and down, I can go down to the bottom of the data table, though if there's a code number that is blank, it'll jump to that, but I can see that it appears that this is the bottom of the data table. The code numbers are in order from 0 to 2035, so it looks like there are 2036 students in this data set. One of the things we'll notice is that we lose the column labels as we scroll down. So I don't like that. I'd like to keep the column labels. So I'm going to go to the view ribbon. You can see that each of these are what are called in Microsoft Office ribbons. If I go to the view ribbon and go to freeze panes, I can choose to freeze the panes. Here, let me show you. If I choose a cell and freeze panes at a cell, what that will do is freeze all the panes to the to the left of that cell and on top. Now I didn't like where I froze the panes, so I will remove that, unfreeze the panes, and then I will freeze the panes in the second row and all the way to the left. And now you can see as I scroll down, I'm scrolling down through the lower students on our list, and we can see that we still retain the rows. We'll do that for every new Excel table we create. So now if I scroll to the bottom, I keep the rows intact. If I scroll all the way to the top and then hit go down one cell, I'll get the top of the data table. The last thing that we'd like to do is let's look at the data ribbon. If I go to filter, filter sets down some drop down arrows. What the drop-down arrows do, if you click on one, is it looks at all of the different data values in that column. Code number is not a good one. Let's look at ethnicity. What I can see from here is that there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ethnicities in the data set. And I can choose to look at any one ethnicity say I choose other, or I can even choose other or Filipino. And now I will only see the students whose ethnicities is designated Filipino or other. So I can choose any one of those. So that is the filter. And in particular, we can use this filter to select subpopulations from our student population. So maybe I want to look at the Filipino students. Maybe I only want to look at the Filipino students whose feeder middle school is Sunnyvale Middle School. So now I'm only seeing Filipino students who are from Sunnyvale Middle School. So we can use more than one filter at a time. You may have seen some websites that work this way as well. If I select all, then I'll go back and reselect all of the students. I have to make sure you can see that there's a little icon that pops up when you have a restriction set up. So you'll see this little icon there says that you've already been using that, and so you can select all. The other thing you can do is just toggle off the filter button, and now your filters don't exist anymore. So, for the Excel navigation tips, we've learned how to hold down the control button and use the arrow keys to jump to the next blank cell in that direction. And we can combine with the shift key to highlight blocks of cells. We'll see that in the next video. You can use freeze panes in the video ribbon to keep the column labels on top of your data table. You can use the filter in the data ribbon to select the group of individuals you're interested in. So, jumping to the end with the shift key, with the control key, you can use freeze panes in the view ribbon and filter in the data ribbon. So, on to the sampling portion. In order to motivate this sampling, we're going to select a research question. In this case, I want to test the claim that the proportion of Sunnyvale students whose parents earned a high school diploma is different than Columbia's students. So these are the feeder middle schools from Sunnyvale and Columbia. I'm not going to test this claim, but I will show you how I'm going to draw the samples. So we have two populations that we're interested in. We're interested in the subpopulation of students who came from Columbia Middle School, and we're interested in the subpopulation of students who came from Sunnyvale Middle School. So the first sample, what I'd like to do is collect a simple random sample of 100 students from Columbia Middle School. So, we go to our data. I'm going to institute a filter. And I'm going to draw my first sample. These are the students who went to Columbia Middle School and are now at our high school. So we can see it's not every student. You can see that the code numbers are skipping around. And I'm going to use this plus sign here to open up a new worksheet. And I'm going to put the name, let's call this the Columbia population. So this is a subpopulation. And now what I'd like to do is just get all of the rows. So I'm going to hold down the shift and control button and jump to the end. So you can see that I've highlighted everything to the right. And then I'm going to hit the down button, still holding down shift and control, And this gets me all of Columbia's students. I'm going to hit Control C to copy, Control V to paste. One thing, sometimes you don't get to read all the cells need to be resized, and an easy way to do that is to just hold down the click button and drag over all of the columns, and then find the in between two columns and just double click, and the cells will automatically widen enough to show you all the data. I'm going to freeze panes here in case we need it. And now I'm ready to choose my simple random sample. I want 100 students, and in order to randomize, what I'm going to do is start a new column called random. I go to the top of our population, and I'm going to hit equals rand, open parentheses, close parentheses. This is an Excel function. It picks a random number between 0 and 1, a random decimal. It's going to give each student a random decimal. Well, it's going to give this student a random decimal. What I'd like to do is give each student a random decimal. So I could copy and paste. If I copy, Control C, Control V in this new student, I get a new thing. Now notice that it'll recalculate the rand, and so every time I make a change to this table, it selects new random numbers. That's fine for now. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to give each student a random number and then fix it so it doesn't change anymore. I can copy any formula all the way down the table by finding the lower right of the, see that little box there? Here, I can zoom in a little bit. You can see this little box here. If I hover over that so that my pointer changes and double click, it copies the whole thing down. But these random scores are going to change, so I want to hold them steady. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift, Control, and down. I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to right click on what I'm copying and just copy over again. There's a whole bunch of different ways to paste things in Excel, and in particular what I'd like to do is paste as values. What this does is it replaces all the formulas with the number that the formula calculated. So now instead of having rand, I'm going to scroll back up to the top with Control up. Now instead of rand, I get these numbers. Okay, so each student has a randomly assigned score to them. And then what I'd like to do is sort the students from highest to lowest, or lowest to highest, whatever your preference. But I'm going to go highest to lowest because I just always have that preference. And so I'm going to put the filter on, and now the filter grabs the random as well. I'm going to filter on random, and I see some options. Instead of selecting random, selecting one of these random scores, I'm going to sort largest to smallest. Now you can see not only do we not have all the students, but they're not in any order. They're not in order from smallest to largest code. So we've shuffled the students. Now, like you shuffle a deck of cards and hand 5 cards out to a 5-card poker hand, we're going to select, we wanted 100 students. Let's look under number filters. In number filters, down here there's a top 10. Okay, that doesn't sound quite what we want, but we do want the top 100 students. So I'm going to click on that, and sure enough, I can go to top and put in 100, and I'm going to pick top 100 items. Now, I'm filtering, but when I go to the bottom, you'll see I only go down to row 101. I can double check and make sure that I've counted that many students. Let's go to the ethnicity column, and I'm going to hit Shift Control up. Sorry. Let's go to the top. I'm going to hit Shift Control down to highlight, and I have counted 101 cells, but that's counting this ethnicity cell, the top row, which doesn't count a student. So I only have 100 students right now displayed. Let's copy those students into our Columbia sample. Control C or Command C for you, and for those of you using Apple products. Control V. I'm going to go up to the column labels and open that up. At this point, we don't need the random column. It's done its job. So I'm gonna, if I click on I get the entire column. If I right click, I can delete the column. And that's it, it's gone. So now we've got our Columbia students. So we have selected our first sample, 100 Columbia students. Let's go to our second sample. We want a simple random sample of 100 students from Sunnyvale Middle School. So what I'm going to need to do now is let's put a landing spot. Oh, sheet 3 opened up to the right. So, okay, there. And I'm going to double click and rename this to Sunnyvale population. Let's go back to our student population. This is the population with all 2,036 students. And instead of looking for the Columbia students, let's see, I like to see the whole list. Let's go to Sunnyvale. So now I've got the students from Sunnyvale. I'm going to highlight that table, copy, paste. I'm going to expand by double clicking here. I'm going to expand my column so I can see everything. Now we're going to drop a random column. Let's freeze panes. We're going to drop a random number. Rand, open parentheses, close parentheses, hit enter, and now this student at the top, student number 14, has a random score, except it's going to change. Now I'm going to copy this all the way down. Right click, notice it jumps all the way down to the bottom, and now we have random scores for everybody. Now I'm going to hit Control and Shift, or Command and Shift for your Macintosh users, your Apple users. And down, I'm going to hit Control C, and then right click and paste as values. So instead of having rand, now we have our random scores. To get our sample, we're going to put our scores in order. Okay, data, filter, largest to smallest on the random. So now we've got the students with the highest scores, and I'm going to choose the students with the highest 100 scores. Hit enter, and we can see we're down to row 101. Sunnyvale sample. If I just take the 100 displayed, that's my random sample of 100. So we've got the Columbia population now. If I unfilter by selecting all, or even dropping the filter off of there, now I have all the Columbia students. I've got the Columbia sample. Notice that there are a whole bunch of Columbia students. Looks like about 824 of them. By looking here, I see 825, okay, 824 rows in the table. I've got the Columbia sample, which only has 100 Columbia students. I've got the Sunnyvale population. We can reveal all of them now by unfiltering. And I've got the Sunnyvale sample. I don't need my random scores anymore. Let's freeze panes here. And we can freeze panes in our Columbia sample as well. Now, if you remember from hypothesis testing for two populations, you wanted to pool the two samples that you got together. We got that pooled sample proportion. And so we can actually physically, well, digitally, pool our two samples together. In the following way. Actually, you know what? Forget about that. I'm going to delete this. So let's take our Columbia sample. I'm going to copy it. Right click here, move and copy. I'm going to move this to the end, but I'm going to create a copy. This creates a copy of the Columbia sample. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Columbia students and then add in the Sunnyvale students into our sample. So let's call this the pooled sample. Okay, this just has the Columbia students for now, but let's go to our Sunnyvale sample. Let's make sure that we're at the top. Control up, okay, we're at the top. I'm not going to copy in the row labels, so I'll go to row 2, and I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and highlight our 100 Sunnyvale students. Now I'm going to go to my pooled samples. You can see we still have Columbia students here, but if I click right here to the cell just under that, row 102, and paste, I get my Columbia students and my Sunnyvale students in one sample. So this is important when you're doing the comparing to populations. I have a video planned, and I will set this up. I have a video planned where I'll show you what you can do once you have your samples pooled together to get some of the summary data that you need. So for now, let's just look at, I put the filter on to see that now I have students that are from Columbia and Sunnyvale. I forgot to put this slide up. Pooling samples, we can help our future calculations if we put two samples together in one table. In conclusion, I would like to say that I showed you how to do the more complicated operation of choosing two samples from restricted populations. You can use this technique to choose a simple random sample from any one population, any one subpopulation that you want. So this video will be useful for both versions. And that is what I have to say for this video. This should get you started on the sampling. We will talk later about doing your analysis for your project.